Rimworld is an amazing game. It's so much fun and I feel like you can easily get hundreds of hours of entertainment out of the base game alone. But what if you wanted more? Hey guys, this is Eric with Pixel Rookie, and today I wanted to talk about Rimworld, the modded experience. When I play games like Rimworld, I like to play it without using any mods to get the full experience that the game developer intended for the players. In fact, I have a full vanilla narrative series on Rimworld and I had an absolute blast making it, but now the times have changed and I decided I was going to start modding Rimworld and seeing what the community made to, enhance its gameplay. Boy was I in for a surprise. The modding community for this game is absurd. I mean, it's absolutely incredible. It opens up so many new ways you can play the game and it's so cool to see. Do you want to create a cult that performs human sacrifices to monstrous deities that grant you dark powers? How about unlocking the ability to use nuclear power and do things like, I don't know, maybe genocide entire colonies with a nuclear warhead? Not your style? No worries. How about giving your colonists the ability to poop? Maybe you want wild dinosaurs running around the outskirts of your base. Okay, well, what if you wanted to extract genes from all these animals and make an unstoppable hybrid mutant monstrosity killing machine? The sheer amount of different options are almost overwhelming, and I really feel like there's something for everyone. Star Wars, zombie apocalypse, medieval colonies. I could go on forever, but this video isn't about any of these mods. No, there's one specific mod I really want to focus on, but I'll come back to that shortly. After finishing my vanilla series, I decided the next series would be modded. I didn't want to do anything too crazy, so I stuck with a lot of quality of life mods and other ones that just sounded cool to me that would enhance the game but not divert too far off from the standard experience. The idea was to do another Randy Random's Rough Commitment Mode series, but this time it was going to be a tribal start, and the most notable mods included were Run and Gun, which lets you shoot while moving because that sounds awesome. Giddy Up, which lets you mount animals, which just sounds really cool too, especially when you pair it up with Run and Gun. Simple Sidearms, which lets you equip multiple weapons because I think it makes sense if you're shooting at someone with a rifle, you'd carry a melee weapon on you in case they got too close. And the most impactful mod, and the main reason I wanted to make this video, Combat Extended. It turns out, this mod would ultimately be my demise. You see, when I was doing research on the game, Combat Extended sounded like the coolest mod of them all. It completely revamps the combat system. You have ammo, which means you have to make every shot count. It adds better cover and hit systems. I could go on, but basically it sounded like an awesome mod to me. Well, this is where I was wrong.
Come on, I know it's just dangling out the tip of your tongue. Let me hear it just once, please.
I will succeed playing the Combat Extended mod.
Wrong!
Combat Extended makes the game a lot harder. At least that was my experience with it. And I'm not trying to say that this is a bad mod by any means. It's really cool and extremely impressive with what it does. I just couldn't handle the difficulty. I think to really describe what I'm talking about, let me share my story of this modded playthrough with you so you can understand the tragedy that Combat Extended brought to me and my colonists. Oh, and by the way, if you're interested in a full list of the mods I used, they're all linked in the description below. Like I said previously, I decided on the tribal start. The idea is that this tribe was raided by a group of nasty pirates that pillaged most of their settlement. Only 5 men managed to escape, and they found themselves in a mountainous region where they decided they would rebuild and seek vengeance for what happened. And this is where our story begins. The group consisted of 5 tribal men, the first being Ryan, a forager who had a passion of farming and living off the land. Shia, a strong man with a parted beard who was a powerful melee fighter and loved to craft things. Brandon St. Randy, who had a clean-shaven head and a nicely shaped beard and was an adept fighter. Toddy, a large man with a shaved head and a wild beard. You wouldn't know it at first glance, but he was very intellectual and loved to research. And finally, Legendmere, a skinny man who had wild hair and a full beard that was one of their village's top medicine men. This tribe was unique in that they had wolves as pets and had a strong bond with these majestic creatures. They were Finn, Ivy, and Rosalina. They only had 3 wolves, a handful of food, building supplies, weapons, and medicine. It wasn't much, but it would be enough for them to start rebuilding. They scouted the land to see where the best place would be to set up their base. In the middle of this territory, there was an abandoned shelter and some space that would be good enough to establish their new village. They would use the abandoned building as their temporary sleeping shelter, and of course they would need to have a research bench in order to advance their knowledge of more modern weaponry. They needed crops to keep their food supplies high, and they plotted out growing zones. Little smoke leaf, cotton, rice, heel root, strawberries, more rice, and potatoes. A little bit of everything. Variety is the spice of life after all. And add some doors to their shelter. The men had a variety of weapons and the best fighters equipped their best weaponry. Time started and the men grabbed their things. It was time to begin rebuilding what they lost. They passed through a herd of wild muffalos as Toddy and Ryan immediately started working the land to grow more food. Their current supplies would only last so long. The other men worked together cutting down trees for supplies and building the few structures they planned out for their base. To prevent their supplies from rotting from the weather, they planned a structure in the mountains to keep them safe. At the end of the first day, they finished their research bench and queued up complex clothing as their first task. Progress was slow but steady on the first day. Sleep tight, my sweet pawns. You'll need it for what's to come. Bright and early the next day, the men slowly woke up and continued working on establishing their new home. They needed to hunt for more food. Brandon was the man for the task. That peaceful herd of buffalo would make for great food supplies. Brandon picked his unfortunate victim and hunted it down. Ryan thanked Brandon for the buffalo and proceeded to butcher it for its meat. This would give them plenty of food to work with for a couple of days. More progress was made. The men were hopeful. They continued with constructing around their shelter for a research room and a small food storage area. Toddy was relaxed while working on their research projects while the rest of the men labored away. That evening, a wandering man found the remaining tribesmen and joined them. We'll name him Yellow Horse. Yellow Horse used to be a bartender until recently when he left his colony to wander the land. The men were glad to have him there. Now that they had another person here, it was time to start building some new huts for additional space. Their initial shelter was getting a little too crowded. They decided they would rename their tribe and settlement. The men decided to call themselves the Unbroken in their settlement rebirth. Most of their tribe was destroyed, but they remained and they would rise up and take vengeance after all. At least that was the plan. The following day, Brandon was fed up with the rest of the men. He had food poisoning and was in a lot of pain. He decided he was going to leave Rebirth and run wild. Toddy went to convince Brandon that leaving was not really an option. He didn't take it very well. Only equipped with a bow, he tried to run back and take a shot at Toddy, but he couldn't withstand his powerful fists. They decided they would hold him captive and convince him to rejoin their tribe. They would need his help. It would take some time, but they knew they could talk him into rejoining. Brandon got a little bruised up from Toddy when he was captured. Ryan took the herbal medicine and was tending to his bruises. He continued using more herbal medicine to patch him up. See, this is one of the biggest issues I had with Combat Extended. I feel like any inflicted wound would take an unlimited number of medkits and hardly make any difference. The next day, Legendmere continued working on Brandon's bruises. For the entire day. Wait, he just grabbed the last herbal medicine. They had 14 of those just a day ago. Legendmere worked on Brandon so much that he had a mental break because he was so focused on tending to him that he didn't eat and was starving himself. Without any herbal medicine left, Ryan continued trying to heal Brandon with his bare hands. Their wolves were trained enough to be ridden, and Shia rode out for another quick hunt for more food. While honing his shooting skills, Toddy finished their first research project. Next up was complex furniture. Other than a minor setback with Brandon using up all their medicine for a couple of bruises, things were coming along nicely with Rebirth. Moods were starting to get low though, and a couple mental breaks began happening. Fortunately, it wasn't anything major. The next day, they saw a transport pod fly through the air and crash nearby. Legendmere went out to investigate and he found an injured man near the wreckage. His name was Joris. Legendmere decided to hold him captive to heal his wounds and they would try to recruit him. He could also give Brandon some company in their prison hut. Toddy was a smooth talker and tried working on convincing Brandon to rejoin their tribe. It was a slow process, but they were patient. They could continue working the two men. They finished their research on complex furniture and continued slowly progressing. On the 15th, they noticed their wolf, Finn, was hurt. He was hurt from hunting a wild boar that stabbed him with its tusks. Death in 7 hours? We need to help him quick. They didn't have any medicine, so Legendmere tried to stop the bleeding himself. He literally spent the next 7 hours tending to Finn, but in the end, it didn't help in the slightest. Finn bled out and died. It was the tribe's first true casualty since they founded Rebirth. These were resourceful men though. They cherished their animal companions, but they would eat his meat and use his hide to honor his memory. The men were saddened by the death of Finn, but they continued to progress as they entered the September season. Their crops grew and they continued trying to recruit the men to their tribe. Progress was still slow but steady. Then things went south very quickly when a nearby caribou went mad. This was their first real threat at Rebirth, and Shia casually said he would take care of the mad beast. Well, the mad caribou completely ignored Shia. It circled around their base and its eyes caught Legendmere. Legendmere tried to hide inside, but the caribou burst through the door, and in one strong butt of the head, Legendmere was taken down. Shia started wrestling the beast while trying to stab it and avoid its swinging antlers. Yellow Horse heard the screaming and began making his way over to help. Ryan also saw the chaos and readied his club and came to back Shia up. He came inside and the raging caribou turned on him immediately and crushed his neck in one blow. Ryan died instantly. Shia was stunned by what he just witnessed, and the beast knocked him out while his guard was down. Yellow Horse entered the building right then and proceeded to attack the caribou. Right before Toddy arrived to help, Yellow Horse managed to down the vicious beast. He readied the butt of his gun and said, "This is for Ryan," right before smashing its head in to finish it off. That Combat Extended melee revamp is intense to say the least. Things were all of a sudden very bad. Shia and Legendmere were temporarily down and Ryan perished. Looking over the last moments of his life, you can see that he hesitated for a moment on bashing the caribou's head in. Right then it lacerated his neck with its antlers and killed him immediately. Poor guy. A grave would be dug just outside of Rebirth where Ryan would be laid to rest. Randy decided to mix it up with some more fun. A cold snap just came through. So much for all their crops. Legendmere was able to walk again, but suffered a mental break from being in a bloody mess of a room. It was too much for him to bear. Toddy was next to break down. With this cold snap, they'd freeze if they didn't set up some campfires. It was so cold that Legendmere collapsed, and at the same time, they were getting raided. Thanks, Randy. It was just one raider though, and she didn't seem like the brightest bulb since she decided to raid a mega spider nest instead of the tribesmen. She was swarmed and dealt with in no time. Toddy recovered from his mental break and scooped up Legendmere to lay him indoors. They needed to light those campfires fast. Yellow Horse took the initiative and began constructing them. He also dug up the grave for Ryan, and Toddy buried him shortly afterwards. Toddy was saddened to bury Ryan, but at least his body could rest in the ground finally. He needed to give the prisoners a fire to keep warm too. As Toddy returned with wood, Brandon died from hypothermia. They had no idea he was suffering so much from the cold. They hated that Brandon died as a prisoner and not as one of their own. Regardless, a grave was prepared and Toddy stayed up late into the night digging it up. He collected Brandon's body and carried it over to the freshly dug grave. To make sure the rest of the men didn't suffer the same fate, they planned to craft some of their own parkas. There was a cargo pod drop of alpaca wool nearby that Toddy was getting for the parkas. On his ride back to the base, his wolf went into a depressive daze because her bonded owner, Shia, died. They didn't even realize his wounds were that bad. So maybe it's not that Randy is cruel and combat extended is hard. Maybe it's just that I'm bad at the game. Nah, that can't be it. All the while, Yellow Horse passed out from the cold while wandering in his mental break and had to be rescued. Another tribesman lost. Only 2 remained along with Yellow Horse. They prepared another grave for Shia. Yellow Horse grabbed Shia's body from his hut and carried him to his grave. He buried him late that night with the other fallen men. Toddy finally finished their first parka to help combat the cold weather. He carried it outside and decided to just put it on right there. He already felt much more comfortable with its heavy insulation. The weather got worse on the 8th as it began snowing outside. Legendmere was still without warm clothes, and that's when they realized that they should check their other prisoner, Joris, and see what gear he had. Well, all this time the men were dying from the cold and Joris was decked out in a nice parka. They hated to do it, but their lives were more important than their prisoners. Legendmere apologized to Joris and made him strip off his clothes as he took them for himself. Joris was angry at what they were doing, but he was defenseless to stop them. Legendmere's guilt slowly dissipated as the warmth of the parka covered his body. At this point, Joris was as good as dead if they kept him as a prisoner and made the decision to release him. Before they had the opportunity to release Joris from captivity, he died of malnutrition. The men had been in such bad shape that they weren't even able to feed their prisoner. Yellow Horse took his corpse out of their prison hut and placed him in their dumping zone. Earlier on, they received an incapacitated refugee quest not too far from their settlement. The Unbroken were slowly breaking, and they needed more men. Yellow Horse used to wander the surrounding areas and volunteered himself to go rescue this person and recruit a new member to their colony. He chose his route and he said his goodbyes. The trip wouldn't take too long, so he packed his things and set off on his short journey. Right after he left, there was a refugee being chased by a single raider and requested help. The men accepted him into Rebirth as one of their own. He was a veterinarian and he was renamed a Cardicate. He went to their supply stash and equipped himself with some gear. The drifter arrived shortly after. The 3 men lined up behind a tree for cover and waited for the raider to turn the corner. She rounded the corner and the men lined up their shots. Where are their shots? Okay, well they all just stood there and let her approach them. She engaged in melee combat and the men ganged up on her. Toddy was injured, so he fell back while the other 2 fought intensely. They continued exchanging blows until Cardicate finally inflicted a critical hit that took her down. The raider was wounded enough that they couldn't do anything to save her, and she had a nice parka on her that they could use. They stripped the clothes off of her and Cardicate exchanged his light duster coat with her heavy parka. She would bleed out or the cold would take her. Either way, the men left her there to die and went on with their business. That evening, Yellow Horse arrived at his destination. It looked like there was a sleeping mechanoid right by the injured refugee. Yeah, that looks pretty close. Regardless, Yellow Horse crept in to offer this man his help. He was careful where he stepped to make as little noise as possible. They were lucky. He helped this man up and he offered to join the tribe as the mechanoid was completely unconscious. Yellow Horse picked him up and carried him out of the area. Wait, what? Caravan lost? What does that even mean? Hayden was lost. Aw, come on. Anyways, Yellow Horse returned defeated without any new members. Things were actually calm for the next few days until they were attacked by another raider. It was just one woman with an auto pistol. They didn't want to risk getting shot, so they hid until she entered their dining hall and started setting fire to their things. They gathered outside of the room, and on the count of 3, they rushed in to attack her. Yellow Horse was in the front line taking the brunt of the damage. Toddy was helping out, but Legendmere couldn't make his way through the doorway. Yellow Horse was getting hurt and tried to fall back. Legendmere slid into his place, and after a bit more fighting, she was wounded enough to be taken down. Looking over the men quickly, they seemed okay. Oh crap, wait. Yellow Horse was bleeding slightly and would die in 18 hours unless he was treated. They put out the fire while Yellow Horse made his way to his bed to rest. Toddy captured the raider to be placed in their prison for the time being. Legendmere approached Yellow Horse, rolled up his sleeves, and began getting to work. He tended to him until he had a mental break and started avoiding the other men. Cardakit got up and immediately continued where Legendmere left off. They continued for hours until Legendmere snapped out of his mental break and kept trying to save him. 18 hours of straight doctoring on his wounds and it practically did nothing. Yellow Horse died right there. What they didn't realize is that Rosalina went berserk when he died because she was his bonded pet.
Oh no!
Poor Cardakit was being ravaged in his bed and there was nothing he could do to defend himself. Legendmere tried to run for his life. An angry wolf in the combat extended mob was not exactly the best combo right now. It didn't take her long to catch up to him, but he avoided her bites as he ran. He finally turned to defend himself, and after a swift stab, he downed Rosalina. She was bleeding out from her wound. They knew there was no way they could save her now. Even worse though, Cardakit was also critically wounded and he would bleed out soon if nothing was done. He had to try and save him. In classic Randy fashion, a raider showed up during this and Legendmere was the only man that could currently stand. He tried to position himself outside of the room and take a shot at him. The raider entered the room and bashed their poor wolf pup in the head and killed it immediately. After that, the raider decided to kidnap Toddy and ignore the others. He was leaving with his new prisoner. During this chaos, Cardakit finally bled to death and died in his medical bed. Desperate, Legendmere pulled out his knife and chased the raider down. Legendmere caught him and began attacking him from behind. The fool ignored Legendmere's attacks and continued fleeing with Toddy. One final blow to his back took the raider down. Legendmere stripped him of his gear and hoisted Toddy over his shoulder. He was heavy, but Legendmere was able to carry him to the medical bed and lay him down. Just like that, 2 more men died and only the 2 tribesmen remained. As Legendmere dug up the second grave, Rosalina finally bled to death. There wasn't anything they could have done to help her. Their prisoner was too injured to be saved, so Legendmere stripped her of her things. Then he took Yellow Horse's corpse to the graveyard and buried him with the rest. Finally, he buried Cardakit, who was only part of their tribe for a brief period of time. Pigskin? Thanks, Randy. He finished burying Cardakit and the 2 men struggled to maintain their empty base. Their food supplies were dangerously low and there was no wild game to hunt anywhere. Seriously? The only living creature was a warg, so they did what they needed to do. They had 2 visitors at their base, so what's the worst that could happen? While the warg slept, Legendmere lined up his shot.
Oh no!
Well, the warg woke up and it wasn't too happy. It took just 1 bite and Legendmere was incapacitated. Toddy was going to make his way down to rescue Legendmere, but the warg had other plans for him. Toddy saw it barreling towards him through the woods and he fell back to get a better vantage point. He got 1 shot off, but even while wounded, this warg was really fast. Toddy tried to run to their guests, but it wouldn't let up. Please help! Toddy desperately turned to fight the warg, but things weren't looking good as it was beating on him. 1 final bite took him down too. He was wounded badly. Lucky for the men, a mysterious man in black sensed the chaos and showed up to help the men. As the man in black approached their base, the warg made its way to the guests. They didn't stand too much of a chance against the warg either. It finally approached the man in black who was named Buffalo, and in 1 skillfully placed shot, it was finally downed. He ignored it and ran over to Toddy. He tried getting him into a bed and tried to stop the bleeding. Buffalo saw that his wounds were too bad at this point and he was a lost cause. He went out and gathered up Legendmere to try and prioritize tending to his wounds instead. Shortly after, Toddy died. Oh no, not again. Ivy went into a berserker's rage once she sensed the death of her owner. Buffalo saw her running towards them and he began to flee. It didn't do too much good as she caught up to him and began to attack. He tried to hit her with the butt of his pistol, but her bites were too vicious and she bit off his entire left leg. As soon as Buffalo fell, she went over to Legendmere and bit him on his right foot, which caused more bleeding. This ensured his inevitable death. After sealing the fate of the last 2 remaining men, Ivy's berserker's rage subsided. That afternoon, Legendmere died. Just a few hours later, Buffalo, who was with the tribe for less than a day, also died. Ironically, the Unbroken were broken and defeated by their own pet wolf, which led them to their demise. and that's how the tribesmen of Rebirth met their end and their tribe was completely wiped out. Man, I love this game. And that's why I decided I wasn't going to play with Combat Extended anymore. Except for the next Rimworld video where I tried one more time and failed, but that's another video for another day. I wanted to make a quick announcement. I'm now streaming on Twitch where I'll be playing Rimworld live with the Twitch plugin that lets you help control what happens to our colonists in a streaming series I'm calling Rimworld, the Hunger Games edition.
Look at there's some. Go, my rat army! Go and eat them!
It's a ton of fun, and I would love it if you'd follow me on Twitch. The link's in the description below. I also want to make a huge shout out to my first YouTube members, Jerry and K9. Thank you for becoming members. And of course I want to make a shout out to my newest patrons. Jerry, who's also one of my members I just mentioned. Thanks, dude. There's also Medical Phoenix, Castillo J, Matt Salivar, Seth Osgood, Dark Ont, Rockius, Dream God, and Aiden Velvin. I also want to throw an extra special shout out to Lil Lilith, who is my first S-tier patron. I can't express my gratitude for everyone's support, and I really appreciate each and every one of you. If you enjoyed this video, check out my other narrative series, and if you haven't already, feel free to subscribe for more content like this. And finally, a huge shout out to all my amazing patrons and members who are helping support the channel so that one day I can create content for your viewing pleasure on a full-time basis. I couldn't do it without your support, and for that, I'm extremely grateful. As always, thanks for watching, and until next time, have a good one.